So again, thank you so much for allowing me to join you remotely. I'm very glad to be with you remotely. Wish I was there in person. Um, I've dropped in on some of the earlier sessions during the day, and I hear the speakers talking about DA and about SAFE and so on. I'm going to talk about an approach to managing risk, which is methodology agnostic, which doesn't depend on your methodology, but which is applicable to any kind of project, whatever methodology you use. And if you would like to address the concept of how to manage risk within an agile framework or an adaptive framework specifically, I'd be happy to do that in the questions afterwards. And I think we're going to find a way of managing the questions remotely as well. So let me get started. I'm going to talk about managing risk in projects, and then specifically at the end, just briefly touching on HERMES and how risk management is currently represented in HERMES and how that might be compared to best practice. So these are my 4 topics for the next 40 minutes or so. The principles of risk management, just to lay the basic foundation so we understand the scope of what we're talking about. Some of this may be revision for you, some of it may actually be new, and I hope so. The purpose of risk management, why is it the most important thing you can do if you're managing projects, if you're managing business, actually if you're managing anything, including managing your life or your family or your pension. I believe that risk management is the most important thing you can do, and I'll explain why that rather bold statement might be true. I'm going to just highlight a best practice process for managing risk in projects, also for managing risk in any of those other contexts as well. And then, as I say, just touching on a practical comparison with how things are currently represented in HERMES, in the HERMES methodology. So I hope you'll find that useful. So let's get started and start talking about the principles of risk management. And let's start with the very basics. What do we actually mean by risk? And I guess if we ask for some images of what risk management might suggest to you, you might have some of these things come to mind or something similar. Risk is a big, ugly thing that threatens you, that threatens to squash you, to make your life very difficult. Risk is a very dangerous situation, whether it's the guy sitting in the chair or the guy in the water, whether you know what the uncertainty might be that could hurt you, or whether it's just something vague out there that's trying to get you. We have this concept that risk is big and bad and ugly and very dangerous, and that affects our way of thinking and our way of approaching risk and risk management. I'd like to suggest to you that that's not a right way to think about risk. And if we're talking about risk principles, we have to get that right from the very beginning. So let me step back to very first principles and get this right together. Is risk the same as uncertainty? And I hope you're all shouting at your screens or in the room saying, no, 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 risk is different from uncertainty. We know that. All risks are uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. There are millions of uncertainties in the world, but we don't have to manage them all. We don't have to think about them or record them. Most of them are irrelevant. We don't care about most of the uncertainties in the world. There's a subset of uncertainties that we call risks, and we think about them, we might write them down, we try to manage them proactively as best we can. So what is the real difference between risk and uncertainty? I use 3 simple words to suggest the difference between these 2 ideas. Risk is uncertainty that matters, because most of the uncertainties don't matter. So how can we filter this huge world of uncertainty and decide which of the uncertainties matter? The answer is that we use our objectives as a filter. Risk is uncertainty that can affect objectives. If it can't affect my objectives, I don't care. And so if I'm thinking about risk in projects, then it's the project objectives which are my filter. Anything that can affect my project objectives is a risk that I need to manage. If I'm thinking about my business, then things that can affect business objectives or my personal objectives. Risk is defined only in relation to objectives. And so we find that we have 2 things to think about when we're defining risk, something to do with uncertainty and something to do with objectives. And there's an ISO standard, ISO 31000, which very neatly puts those 2 ideas together. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. In the UK, we have a project management association, the Association for Project Management, and that's our national body, which is part of IPMA, the International Project Management Association. And here we have a similar definition. Risk is an uncertain event or set of circumstances, but should it occur, it will have an effect on achievement of objectives, of project objectives. So we see these two things coming together, which means that risk is a two-dimensional idea. Something to do with uncertainty, something to do with effect on objectives. And we tend to use the words probability or impact. We could use likelihood or frequency or chance. We could use effect or consequence or result. But probability and impact are the words we use in the project management world. And you'll see I've got a funny picture here that I've been using for some time to illustrate the idea of impact. The mouse is a project manager. He's concerned about risks that might affect his progress, his project to live and to enjoy life. And he's spotted a potential risk in the situation in front of him. And like a good project manager, he's protected himself with his helmet, and he's going very, very carefully. And of course, we should do that in our projects. We should protect ourselves, and we should go carefully in order to avoid anything going wrong that we've seen that could affect our project objectives. But you know, there's another uncertainty that the mouse is interested in, that the mouse needs to manage in this situation. Not just the trap. The mouse also needs to manage the uncertainty of the cheese. He wants to get the cheese off the trap so that he can fulfill his objectives of living safely and having a fulfilling life. And he has to manage two uncertainties together. Can he get the cheese off? Maybe, maybe not. And can he at the same time avoid being killed or injured by the trap? And you know, there is cheese in our projects, and getting the cheese out of our projects is uncertain. We need to manage that uncertainty proactively. But what do I mean by cheese in projects? I mean value, I mean benefits, I mean products and services that people want and need. And you know, we can't guarantee we'll get those things out of our projects. That's uncertain. We need to manage it carefully. We need to manage the uncertainty of creating value at the same time as managing the uncertainty of having things damaged or being late or overspent or damaging reputation or not delivering the performance of our stakeholders. We need to manage both these things together. And the challenge of risk management is to do both of those things together in the best possible way, to get the most cheese out of our projects whilst minimizing our chances of being killed or injured by the traps. And there's always a better way. So this idea of cheese and traps, of two kinds of impact that matter, are really important. If risk is uncertainty that matters, what kind of impact matters? Certainly negative impacts matter, things that could waste time, waste money, destroy performance, injure people, all those bad things, and they need to be managed, any uncertainty that could harm us. But we also need to think about uncertainties that could help us, that could save time, save money, improve performance, enhance the benefits. And those things need to be managed proactively just as much as the negative uncertainties. And so we get the idea that risk is a concept which includes upside as well as downside. It includes positive uncertainties as well as negative uncertainties. And if we look at the definition of risk that PMI has been using for actually just over 20 years, as it happens, it goes like this. Risk is uncertainty connected to objectives, an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has an effect on objectives. But PMI has heard about the cheese and the traps and included that double concept in its definition. So not cheese and traps, but we have these three words. Risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on an objective. So we have the idea that the concept of risk has two sides, two flavors, two colors. That risk includes both upside risk, which we call opportunity, an uncertainty with a positive effect. It may or may not happen, but if it does happen, it helps us, as well as threat. A threat is an uncertainty that may or may not happen, but if it does happen, it has a negative effect. And so risk is a double-sided concept, and it's really important for us to remember that because it affects the way we think about risk and the way we approach risk. And it's not just PMI that has this idea, in case you're wondering that whether PMI has gone into some kind of strange parallel universe. I mentioned the ISO standard, that says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And there's a footnote. Effect is any deviation from expected. It can be positive or negative or both, and can address or create or result in opportunities and threats. And you'll find this idea in all of the main standards to do with risk and risk management, and not just in the world of projects, of course. So it's really important that we see that risk is a double-sided concept, which leads us to consider the purpose of risk management. Why would we do risk management? To manage the uncertainties that matter, including the upside and the downside. So the purpose of risk management in the world of project management is driven by the idea that projects are risky. All projects are risky. There's no such thing as a zero risk project. And there's something about the characteristics of projects which makes them always risky. All projects are unique. Projects involve something that has never been done before. And the uniqueness creates uncertainty in whether we can achieve our objectives. Uniqueness creates risk. Projects are complex. They're not just simple tasks that you can just do without thinking. They require planning. They require technical resources. They require specialized people to work together. Projects are complex, and complexity brings uncertainty. Complexity brings risk into our projects. We don't usually do all of our projects just ourselves unless they're very small projects. Usually we have dependencies. We're dependent on suppliers or on subcontractors or on people to provide knowledge or background or maybe some hardware or some resources. So dependencies create risk. Will we have what we need when we need it? Projects are based on assumptions. We don't know everything and how it's going to work out in the future. So we guess, and we might guess wrong. So assumptions bring risk into our projects. Projects are all about change, and change brings risk with it as we move into an unseen and an unknown future. And projects are done by people, not by robots or machines or by procedures or processes. Projects are done by people, and people bring risk into the projects because we have good days and bad days. We're motivated or we're very depressed. There are some people we like and some people we don't like. And so people bring uncertainty with them, and all projects are done by people. In fact, all projects are unique and complex, based on dependencies and assumptions, implementing change through people. That's what we do, which means that built into projects always is a degree of risk, a degree of uncertainty that matters, that needs to be managed. When we look at the purpose of risk management, then, it's to provide a forward-looking radar. Risk management scans the future. What's out there coming towards us? What do I need to see and affect the way that I manage my project? We might get early warning of some big bad thing that looks like it could be very dangerous. It's heading straight towards us very fast. We need to steer out of the way, or if we can't get out of the way, we need to put some protection in place. But we might also see in our radar some big, helpful, positive, glowing, friendly thing, which looks like it's moving towards us. And if we don't change direction, it might go straight past us and we'd miss it. And we want to steer towards that good thing and make sure that we capture it and include its benefits within our project. Risk management enables proactive, prior positioning and preparation. And that's why it's important. PMI said in the last edition of the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the PMBOK guide, it said that the objectives of project risk management are to increase the probability or impact of positive risks and to decrease the probability and impact of negative risks. Why? In order to optimize the chances of project success. Or just to put it more succinctly, our goals are to minimize the threats, maximize the opportunities, and optimize achievement of project objectives. Who wouldn't want to do that? If that's the purpose of risk management, we should all be interested in doing it, in wanting to minimize the things that could hurt us, maximize the things that could help us, and give ourselves the best chance of success. And this is why risk management is directly correlated with project success. Because we plan to succeed, and the things that stop us succeeding are the things that we didn't plan for, the things that we didn't see when we were looking ahead and trying to work out how we were going to complete this project. And as we know, not just in the world of Agile, but in all the project world, as we make progress on our project, we come across things that we didn't think of before. If those things could affect us, they're risks, they're uncertainties that matter. And our ability to succeed in our project is directly correlated to our ability to manage uncertainty. So it turns out that risk management is the most important thing you can do. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I, being the risk doctor and being a risk management specialist and risk management enthusiast. But I hope you can see from the nature of risk and the purpose of risk management, if you don't get this right, we could really be in trouble. We could miss things that could really damage us and waste time and waste money and really not be doing our project in the best possible way. Who wants to do that? And we could miss things that could help us save time and save money and move towards our goals in the most effective way. Of course, we want to do that. And if we don't do that, I would say that's negligent and unprofessional. So of course we need to do risk management. It should be our top priority to think risk and manage risk. So how do we do that? What is the process for risk management? We've been thinking about Agile today, and fortunately, the risk management process is really, really simple. It's actually really agile. It's easy to implement. It's based on a simple set of questions. Processes can be very complicated, and they have lots of steps and forms and tools and techniques. I'd like to go right back to basics and say, when we're thinking about risk management, we're asking ourselves just a simple set of questions. The first one, what are we trying to achieve? We need to be clear about our goals and objectives so we know where we're heading, so that we know which uncertainties matter and which ones don't matter. Once we know what we're trying to achieve, let's ask ourselves the question, what could affect us as we move towards achieving that? What is out there that could possibly change our ability to achieve our objectives? Those would be the uncertainties that matter. Of course, they're not all equally important, so we need to prioritize them and just ask, out of these things that could affect us, which are most important, which are the most uncertain, which have the biggest impact. And once we know what the most important ones are, what could we do about them? We're not just going to say, well, we know about them now, but we'll just carry on. Of course, we're going to change the way that we manage our project based on knowing about the most important uncertainties that matter, including the best opportunities and the worst threats. And once we know what we could do about it, of course, we'll do that, of course, and then ask ourselves the next question, well, did that work? Did we manage to avoid the worst threats and capture the best opportunities? And if not, what's changed and what do we need to do now? And then back to the beginning and ask the questions again. And you'll see that these very simple questions are really important, but they're also really simple. You could ask those questions in 10 minutes when you're driving to work or sitting on the train. You could have a half-hour meeting, a stand-up meeting with your team, and ask those questions every day. What are we trying to do today? What could affect us? Which are the important ones and what should we do? Okay, guys, let's go do it. Whoops. And once we've done it, did it work? And now what? So these simple questions can be achieved very simply, or we could be more detailed about it. If we have a major program of work, and we're perhaps spending a few years and a few million francs or a few million euros or dollars or pounds, we might want to answer each question a little more carefully, define our objectives in some detail, work out in lots of detail the things that could affect us and prioritize them, and so on. So we see that each of these steps, each of these questions relates to one of the steps in the risk management process. Here's a simple risk management process that looks a little bit like what PMI had in the PMBOK guide recently. And each of these steps in the process relates to one of the questions. As we ask, what are we trying to achieve? That's our process initiation step, defining scope and objectives. We identify the risks by asking what could affect us. And we assess them or prioritize them by saying which of these are most important. Then we plan our risk responses to decide what we could do. We implement the risk responses to do that. And then in our monitor and review step, we see if it worked and ask ourselves what's changed. And it's a cyclic process where we go round again. And we can do that very quickly and easily, or we can spend more time on it, depending on the challenges, the risk challenge of our project or program. So really all we have to do when we're trying to manage risk in projects is think about these questions and think about them in a structured way. I'll just step through each of these steps really quickly, just to give you perhaps a little bit more detail before we move into looking at HERMES and how that works in HERMES. But let's just think about each of these steps. The initiation step is about defining our objectives and scope so that we understand what we're aiming at, and ensure that the level of our risk management process matches how risky the project is and how strategically important that project is. And it's typical to capture, to document the results of the initiation step in a risk management plan, a process description that says, these are our objectives, this is the scope of the risk process, this is how we're going to go forwards. So we identify the target before we start trying to do it. That's obvious, isn't it? In terms of risk identification, there are many different techniques available to us. The aim is to try and expose as many risks as we can. We'll never expose them all, but we want to know all of the knowable risks. We don't want to miss any risk that we could have discovered. And to do that, we need to be methodical and structured, using several different techniques. No one technique will find them all, involving all of our stakeholders, looking for both upside and downside risk, of course, writing them down and coming back and looking again to see what's changed later on in our project. And the frequency of the repeat cycle could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be longer than that, depending on the context and the nature of our project. Once we've identified the risks, we need to analyze them, to assess them, to try and work out what's going on. And there are two different kinds of risk assessment or risk analysis. There's qualitative, where we ask these sorts of questions. What is it? What makes it happen? What's its probability and impacts? Does it really matter? And what can we do about it? And who's going to do that? And then those are the sorts of things that we record in a risk list or a risk register. Another way of answering these questions, which are the most important risks, is to do some form of quantitative analysis, to model the uncertainty in a computer tool, to simulate the effect of risks on our overall project outturn and predict what could happen within a range of the very best and the very worst. And we can use that model to test scenarios to decide what could happen and figure out the most critical risks. And to do this, we need some, as I say, specialized software, typically some kind of Monte Carlo software. Now, with these two different types or styles of risk assessment, it's really important that we understand that where qualitative assessment is always required, quantitative analysis is optional. So we always need to know what the risk is and how big it is, its probability and impacts, who's going to do something. Those things always need to be answered. But the effort of producing a risk model, of quantifying the uncertainty, of simulating it, of interpreting the outputs, that's not always required. And that might be only the case for larger projects or programs or things which are really strategically important. So we don't always need to worry about Monte Carlo simulation, but we should always worry about understanding the risk and recording that in a risk register, and then prioritizing our risks using those two dimensions of probability and impact. And it's quite common to use this kind of traffic light matrix, where we have a red, yellow, green idea of red meaning stop. This is where we really need to take a look. Green meaning that's okay, we can carry on. The red threats are the ones that are most likely and worst in their impact. The green ones either probably won't happen or they probably won't be too bad, and the yellow ones are in between. And we can use a similar approach for opportunities. We can have a kind of mirror matrix for the opportunity side where the impact is not negative but positive. And the red opportunities that we really need to stop and look at have a high chance of happening, and they're really good. These are our best opportunities. The green opportunities that we can just continue without any special attention are the ones that either probably won't happen or they don't help us so much. And so we have this idea of the traffic light, both for threats and also for opportunities, to prioritize our threats and opportunities, prioritize our risks. Once we know which are the most important ones, we need to plan our responses so that we're making appropriate decisions based on the type of risk and the size of it, how manageable it is, how bad it could be, and what resources we have available to deal with it. And we need to find what we're going to do. Should we try and have some kind of emergency response, maybe try and kill off the threat or capture the opportunity? Or should we have some more passive response where we build a contingency plan just in case? Or maybe we just try and reduce the threat or maximize the opportunity. So the response needs to be appropriate to the risk, and somebody needs to take responsibility for that, a risk owner who will deal with that response. And then we need to do what we said we would do, take action, find out if it's working, and then decide what to do next. And that leads us to the reporting phase, where we tell people what we found. It's no good just to do a risk analysis or a risk assessment, maybe produce some kind of risk list and then just put it on the shelf and hope somebody finds it. We need to use that information and work out who needs to know about it and what they need to know and how we're going to tell them, and use it or lose it, because things change. Things are always changing on our projects. So we need to use the risk management information while it's fresh, keep it simple, keep it fresh, act on it now, and then go back and look again. So you'll see that the risk management process is quite simple. It's based on asking and answering those 6 questions. What are we trying to do? What could affect us? Which are the big ones and what could we do about them? Once we've done it, did that work and what's changed? And the way of implementing each of those questions can be quite simple and straightforward, or it can be more detailed depending on the challenge of the project. Well, I hope you've seen that managing risk is really important. I hope you've seen that managing risk is really easy. I'd just like to finish off before we leave some time for questions, thinking about how it works in practice in Hermes. And maybe you're familiar with this. Maybe you'll know that somewhere within that Hermes methodology is a page called Manage Risks, a task called Manage Risks. And I'd just like to highlight a few of the things that are in this particular task, this activity, and compare them with what we've just looked at in terms of best practice. And if you're a Hermes implementer, a Hermes project manager, then hopefully you'll be familiar with this. And hopefully, as I've been going through in the last 20 minutes, half an hour or so, you'll have been thinking to yourself, that's interesting. Is that what we do? Is that how we think about uncertainty that matters on our project? Is that how we go about dealing with it? Or is there something that maybe needs some attention? And so here we find in Hermes just a very simple outline, purpose, basic idea, some Hermes specific aspects, activities, relationships, and outcomes. Let's start with the basic idea. What does Hermes say about risk? The basic idea is, risks are future events. It sounds about right. Risks are future events that pose a problem if they occur. Well, that's partly true. That's true of some of the risks. That's half the truth, but it's not the whole truth. And hopefully, before I get to it, you'll be able to tell me how maybe that basic idea needs to be enhanced or extended. Hold that thought. What about the purpose? What is risk management for? According to Hermes, the purpose of risk management is to identify risks at an early stage, yes, and define measures to ensure success, yes. Is that it? Just to identify them and work out what would mean success? Doesn't sound very active to me. It doesn't sound very proactive. It doesn't sound like we're going to be doing very much if we're just identifying risks at an early stage, only at an early stage. What about risks that arise later? Is that really all we have to do? How about the activities, the process? Here we've got a little bit of detail, which I've just summarized instead of all the words on the page, a few less words. First of all, define the project and the process that we're going to use. Yes. Identify and assess the risks. Yes. Define and document the responses, yes, and communicate the results. Yes, brilliant, big tick. Hermes has the right kind of activities. It doesn't give you any guidance on how to do that, but that's fine. There's lots of guidance elsewhere. So that sounds quite good, except that if the basic idea and the purpose are not fully correct, shall we say, maybe when you implement those activities, you might not be aiming at the right thing. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Who's going to do all this according to Hermes? Well, there's a little task responsibility column with the activities that have to be done. And you'll notice that underneath the whole column, all it says is the project manager. If you're the project manager, you're responsible for this. And that's kind of true, but all on your own, you're pretty busy if you're the project manager. You're not going to get any help. You're not going to get any input or involve anybody else. That doesn't sound quite right to me. And then the outcomes, according to Hermes, the outcomes of managed risks are the project management plan and the project status report. Well, that might be okay. Maybe we'll just have a section in each of those about risk. But maybe if we have a high risk project or a situation where things are changing rapidly or where we need some special attention, maybe that might not be enough. How about we compare these with the sorts of good practice or best practice that I've laid out earlier? Let's go back to that basic idea. Risks are future events that pose a problem if they occur. What we said is that what risks are uncertainties that matter, positive or negative uncertainties that would affect objectives if they occur. So yes, of course, risks are things that could cause a problem. Some of them, those are the threat risks. But what about the opportunity risks? What about upside risks that could help us if they occur, help us to achieve our objectives? If we're only having the idea that risk is bad, all risk is always and only bad, then we're missing half of the risks that could affect us. And the half that we're missing are the helpful halves, the half of the risks that if we could capture them, make them occur, would save us time and save us money and enhance our performance, would make our lives easier, would help us to sleep at night, knowing that we're doing the best that we can to make sure that our project succeeds. And likewise with the purpose, of course, identifying risk is something we have to do, and defining measures of success is something we have to do. But let's get the purpose clear. Risk management is about minimizing the bad things, minimizing threats, maximizing the opportunity in order to optimize achievement of objectives. The purpose is to give ourselves the best possible chance of succeeding in our projects. That's what risk management is for. That's why it's important. And once we get the basic idea and the purpose straight, then yes, the activities are right that Hermes suggests, that we do need to know what the project objectives are and how we're going to tackle risk. We do need to identify and assess them and define and document our responses and communicate the results. Absolutely. But let's get that idea and purpose right. And let's not leave it all to the poor project manager. We need to engage the whole team, all of the stakeholders, in identifying, prioritizing, and responding to risk. And maybe just having the results documented in the project management documentation, in the project documentation, is not enough. Maybe sometimes we might want to have a risk management plan, specifically saying how we'll manage risk on this project. And maybe we might want to have a risk register and a risk report to list those big threats and opportunities and to report on how we're managing them. And that might be a section of our project's documentation, or maybe sometimes it needs to be standalone. So I think you'll see that there are some areas where Hermes is perhaps a little behind the curve, perhaps only giving us part of the story, and some of the things that we could do that would give our projects the best possible chance of success are beyond what it says in Hermes. And maybe we need to expand or extend the idea, the thinking, the purpose behind risk management, implement those activities with everybody involved, and make sure that we document them and communicate them clearly. So maybe there's some work to do. Well, let me wrap up and give us some time for questions, just with a few final thoughts. These are, I believe, the key learning points from this last 30 minutes or so of my presentation. First of all, the principles. Risk is just simply the uncertainty that matters, recognizing that most of the uncertainties don't matter. And we define what matters through our objectives. Risk is any uncertainty that, if it occurs, can affect achievement of our objectives. And that includes bad things and good things, downside as well as upside, negative and positive, traps and cheese. Let's remember that project management mouse. Be like the mouse and be very careful with our helmets on, but also make sure we're focused on the cheese and get the cheese out of, as much cheese out of our project as possible. The purpose of risk management is to make the things that threaten us as small as possible, maybe removing as many of them as we can, making the things that would help us as big as possible and capturing as many as we can, and making sure that our achievement of objectives is optimized. We're doing the best that we can for our projects, for our stakeholders, for our clients and customers. The process is very simple, just asking and answering a set of questions. And those questions are logical. Those questions can be answered in 10 minutes or in a 2-day workshop. It depends on the challenge of the project. And so let's remember, it's just a simple thing to do, to ask questions that anybody would ask. What am I trying to do and what could affect me? Which are the big ones and what could I do? When I did that, did it work and what's changed? That's easy. Everybody should be able to remember that. And then the process flows out of that. And what we want to do is to think about how to do that in practice on our projects. Maybe Hermes just needs a little development in this area, not lots, just a little expansion in the basic idea and the purpose. Keep the activities as they are, consider involving other people, and maybe having a little bit more focused communication. So I think, we're close, but there is some way that you could go to help yourself do it in a better way. Why would you do it? Because it's most important. Because your ability to manage risk is the difference between success and failure. I'm about to offer you the opportunity to ask some questions, but maybe I'll ask you some questions first. If you didn't do risk management well, if you didn't see the uncertainties that mattered, if you didn't spot the threats that could damage your project, could waste time and waste money, if you didn't see the opportunities that could help you, what would happen to your project? Would you be doing the best thing for your project? On the other side, what would happen if you did manage risk well or better on your project? Would that be a good thing? Would that be a helpful thing? And you know what my next question is? Are you going to do it? It's all very well to sit here in a presentation and say, you know what, that's very convincing. I understand. It makes sense. But are we going to do it? And doing risk management is a marathon, not a sprint. It's part of the way we go about managing projects. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of acting. It's a behavior and it's an attitude. So we need to make sure that we build it into the way that we manage projects in future. And if that means it needs to be embodied in our process, in our methodology a little bit better, well, maybe that's something to think about as well. Let me just offer you a couple of quick resources as I finish. There's a couple of books that I've written. One is a little bit older. It's called Managing Risk in Projects. It's very thin. It's got everything you need to know about managing risk in projects, including the principles, the purpose, the process, some people aspects, and so on. If you want something in more detail, Practical Project Risk Management, this is the 3rd edition of this book. It's a little bit more detailed. It's a methodology which includes tips and templates, agendas for meetings, role descriptions, and so on. Scalable, there's a simple version, there's a more complex version, all within the book. You might find that useful to look at. And these books are available through the Risk Doctor website or through Amazon, of course. So I hope you found that useful. I hope I've stimulated your thinking. I'm very open to questions either now or later. If you want to follow up with further information, these are my contact details. I've sent these slides to Serge, so they'll be available to you afterwards if you want to follow up on any of those ideas. Do please ask questions. There's lots of useful resources on the website and also on the YouTube channel. But it's really, really important that you get this right. If you want your projects, if you want to be successful in your career as a project manager. So it is possible to do better. Let's do it. And over to you. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found that useful and interesting, and we're going to open the floor for any questions that there might be. Serge, back to you.